Chapter 1. My birth, early life and education, and how I came to meet my principal master. From the very beginning, all the infinite number of beings that exist have as their essential inherent condition the perfectly pure state of an enlightened being. Knowing this to be true also of me, I commit myself to supreme realization. Lines on Bodhicitta written by Longchenpa, 1308 to 1363, expressing the concept of the base in the Anu Yoga. When I was born in the village of Gurg, in the Kongra district of Durgay, eastern Tibet, in the 10th month of the year of the Earth Tiger, December 1938, it is said that the rose trees outside my parents' house bloomed, even though it was winter. 2 of my uncles came at once to visit my family. They had been disciples of a certain great master, Adzam Drukpa, who had died some years before, and they were both now Dzogchen masters themselves. They firmly believed that I was a reincarnation of their master, both because of things that he had said to them before he died, and because he had bequeathed certain special possessions to a son who he said would be born to my parents after his death. When I was 2 years old, I was officially recognized as a reincarnation by Hai Tulku of the Nyingmapa school, who made me a gift of some robes. I don't remember many of the details of what happened then, but I do know that after that I received an awful lot of presents. Later, at the age of 5, I was also recognized by the 16th Karmapa and by the Situ Rinpoche of that time as the mind incarnation of another great master, who was in turn the reincarnation of the founder of the modern state of Bhutan, and whose lineage had been the Dharma Rajas, or Chogyals, the temporal and spiritual rulers of that state up until the early 20th century. As I grew up, I was thus to be given quite a few names and titles, many of which are very long and grand sounding. But I have never used them, because I have always preferred the name my parents gave me at birth. They called me Namkai Norbu, which is rather a special name in its own way. Norbu means jewel, and Namkai means of the sky or of space. It's unusual for the genitive to be used in Tibetan names, but that's what my parents chose to call me, because although they had 4 fine daughters, they had been longing for years to have a son. So strong had been this longing, in fact, that they had engaged the services of a monk to perform an invocation of Tara on their behalf for a whole year, asking for the granting of their wish. This monk also became my sister's tutor. Eventually, he had a dream, which he interpreted as a favourable sign. He dreamed that a beautiful plant grew upright in front of the hearth of my parents' home. The plant put forth a beautiful yellow flower that opened and grew very big. The monk was sure that this indicated the birth of a male child. Later, when I was born, my parents were so happy that they felt I was a gift from the heavens, so they called me Jewel of Space, and that is the name I have always stuck to. My parents were always very kind to me, and I grew up into a little boy as mischievous as any other, and learned to read and write at home. As a young child, I often dreamed I was travelling at great speed inside what seemed to me to be a tiger, a strange roaring beast. I had never seen a motor vehicle, as there were none at that time in our part of Tibet. Later, of course, I came to travel in many cars, and then I recognized them as being what I had seen in my dreams. When I was a teenager, I did catch my first sight of a lorry. I was on horseback on a mountainside at night, looking down at the vehicles passing on the new Chinese road below. The tail lights glowed red on the giant trucks thundering by, and I thought they must be on fire. I also dreamed of strange flying objects that exploded, causing terrible destruction. I now know that what I saw were missiles that were being developed far away in other parts of the world. I sometimes played such pranks on our neighbours that I would be in serious trouble when my father came home from the travels that his work often involved. He would beat me, and I would be very angry, and try to retaliate against the neighbours who had told my father what I had done by playing even more pranks on them. Then, of course, I would be in more trouble again. I began to become more considerate, largely as a result of my grandmother's influence. She had been a disciple of Adzam Drukpa, and she took a great interest in me. She sometimes managed to keep me from being punished by preventing my parents finding out what I had done. I remember that once I found the dead body of a large rodent called a marmot. Unnoticed by anyone, I spent a blissful afternoon playing with the dead creature, even filling the body up with water and whirling it around my head. But when I took my plaything to bed with me, my grandmother noticed it. She knew that my mother would have been very upset if she had known what I had been doing, and would have worried that I might become infected with some disease. So my grandmother didn't tell anyone. I thought this was very kind of her, and in fact I loved her very much. So when I saw her quietly weeping to herself about my behaviour when she thought I was asleep, I was deeply moved, and resolved to mend my ways. But I can't say that I ever completely succeeded in overcoming my mischievousness altogether. When I was 5 years old, I was playing outside our house one day when 12 monks arrived, all very elegantly dressed. The place where we lived was very isolated and hardly any travellers ever passed, so I was very surprised to see them. I couldn't think why they had come. They went into the house, and a little later I was called to go in after them. I was taken into the small shrine room we had there, and they dressed me in fine silk robes. I didn't understand why I was being dressed up, but I enjoyed it just the same. I sat there on a high throne they had specially prepared for me, for hours and hours while they performed the ritual, and then they went away. I thought to myself, well, that's the end of that. But everyone went on reminding me that I was a reincarnation and showing me great respect. And I soon realised that far from being the end of anything, everything was just beginning. A couple of weeks later, some monks came and took me to the Durge Gonchen monastery, which was a very important place in that region. The king of Durge himself lived there. My father worked in the king's administration, at first as an official roughly equivalent to a mayor or a provincial governor in the West, and later, since he loved animals so much, as the head of a department whose function was to prevent hunting out of season or in excess in the whole of that part of Tibet. I was taken to see the king, and since I was now recognised as a reincarnation, he put an entire building inside the monastery compound at my disposal. I lived there until I was 9 years old, with a master, a teacher, who made me study hard day and night. There were many things to learn, including all the rules and prayers of the monastery. A monk normally finishes at 19 years of age the phase of study I undertook there, but I completed it at the age of 8 because my master was so strict, and I was allowed no free time at all. I also had a natural gift for memorising things. My mischievous side did manage to surface from time to time, however. I remember, for example, that once, when the king was involved in a military ceremony that required him to sit still on horseback for a long time in the courtyard below and opposite the first floor window of my house, I leaned over the sill and used a mirror to reflect the sun's light into his eyes to dazzle him. My intention, innocent enough, was to lighten the rather overly heavy seriousness of the occasion for the king, and fortunately for me, he knew me very well by that time, so that instead of being offended, he even enjoyed the joke himself, once he had recovered his composure. Then, for a year, I learned all the rules for the drawing and practice of mandala, after which I went to a monastic college. A college always has its rules and regulations, and the normal curriculum of the one I attended was that one studied there for 5 years. But since I entered at a much earlier age than usual, I was there for 6 years. The normal age of entry was at least 13, and I was only 9 years old when I went there, so they didn't count my first year, which was regarded as a sort of trial period to see if I was capable of staying the course. It wasn't just a matter of memorising things any longer. We studied philosophy, which requires a capacity to reason well, and many people found the going too tough and dropped out.